My name's Ari Tuckman. I'm a psychologist outside of Philadelphia. And probably like you guys, I meet with clients all day. Like that's really what I do. I mean, I do presenting, I do writing, but really what I do is I meet with clients all day. And what we're going to talk about today, therefore, is going to be very sort of, it's going to be all about like clinical application, right? What do you do? Um, with the next client that you see who has ADHD. Um, and specifically today, we're going to talk about kind of like starting with like elementary school, going up through high school, and then launching out into the world. And then I think in 2 weeks or so, I'm going to be back for a presentation on treating adults with ADHD. But let me start us off here. All right. So, in terms of how I think about working with ADHD kind of kids and teens, I very much sort of think in a family model, just because of the way that ADHD impacts the individual's ability to do what they need to do and how that sort of impacts the whole family. And that generally speaking, kids with ADHD, given their age, right? So 8-year-old versus other 8-year-olds, 12-year-old versus other 12-year-olds, that they tend to be less on task. They tend to be less on top of what they need to do, and therefore tend to require more oversight by the adults around them. That could be parents, teachers, I don't know, the soccer coach, the parents next door when they're hanging out there. That just in general, broad sweeping statement, kids with ADHD tend to require more oversight by the adults around them. Also, because let's all be honest, kids are challenging sometimes and life is stressful, right? As adults, we have our own stresses, our own hard days. We are not always perfect in how we respond to, our kids or somebody else's kids. So kids with ADHD therefore get a lot more not just negative reactions, right? Because they're not doing the things someone hopes they should be doing, but also more intense negative reactions. And that then affects the relationship. It affects how the kid with ADHD sees themselves. It also affects how the parent sees themselves, right? Because none of us like to be yelling at our kids. Um, so we'll talk some about that. In that, just in general, folks who are under functioning tend to evoke more over functioning from other people, right? Somehow the gap has to be filled. And if you can't get this distractible, forgetful, impulsive kid to do it, then often the adults sort of step in. I think it's also worth noting here that if there's a child in the family with ADHD, there's a pretty good odds that other genetic relatives in the family also have ADHD. And if it's an adult, it's not just rather likely that one of the parents has ADHD, it's also rather likely that that ADHD has been undiagnosed and untreated. So you're not only dealing with the relationship between the parents and the child, you're also dealing with a relationship between the two parents. And we're going to touch on that as well. Now, there's the old chestnut of like getting parents on the same page and like obviously, sure, yes. Also, no two parents can be on exactly the same page, but they don't need to be. They just need to not be like actively undermining each other. So, a lot of the work also in these families is kind of getting the two parents a bit more on the same page or working together a bit more, kind of like on the same team. So if there is one single thing that you walk away from this presentation with, it is this slide. So basically, slide 3, you can stop paying attention. Not actually. But ADHD is a disorder of self-regulation, meaning the ability to manage one's own thoughts, feelings, and actions. And that, primarily through the way it impacts the executive functions, and we'll talk some more about that, but that kids, teens, and even young adults, like into sort of early to mid 20s, have about a 2 to 4 year delay. So if you've got a 16-year-old with ADHD, no matter how brilliant they are in every other part of their life, when it comes to life management skills, those executive functions, the ability to plan activities, to follow the plan, to sort of think ahead into the future, right? I've got this really big paper due in a month. Maybe I should start working on it before 29 days from now. Um, that 16-year-old is functioning more like a 14-year-old, 13, maybe even a 12-year-old at times. We're going to talk at the end about like launching these, late teens into the world. That has some big implications, right? For good reason, we do not send 15-year-olds off onto the wild west of a college campus. But functionally, that 18-year-old with ADHD, especially again, undiagnosed, untreated, functionally they are about 15 years old. So given this delay, my big mantra, my sort of guiding principle is independence, meaning the ability to kind of run your own fate. Independence is based on abilities, not age. I don't care how old you are, show me what you can do. And I mean, show me. Do not tell me what you're going to do. I mean, show me what you can do, by which I mean, show me what you have done, right? And we're going to keep coming back to this idea. So, in general, then, I tend to do with kind of kids and teens and again, even young adults with ADHD, I do more family therapy rather than just individual therapy. And the reason is the symptoms of ADHD affect not only the child or teen's ability to do what they need to do, but also obviously, right, it also affects the parents and what they do and how they do it. So for younger kids, meaning, I don't know, there's no hard line on this, but let's say like 8 or younger, um, I don't, I would never really do an individual session with a 7-year-old. It might be a lovely conversation, but I have no faith that anything is going to be done differently at home. Um, Instead, I may do a lot more sessions with just the parents, and it's kind of talking about how to manage the situation and how to help them understand. And, because the parents are the ones who are there all day, or at least except for school, they're there all day. For kind of older elementary school kids, for middle school kids, generally I'll do more sessions with everybody together because I'm going to hear a lot more important details from the parents about like, so how was the week? But also when it comes to implementing what we're talking about, the parents are going to be more involved in it. Um, I might do some sessions with just a middle schooler. I might do some sessions with just the parents. So, like, I'm happy to play musical chairs, but generally, maybe a bit more kind of everybody together. And again, nothing is written in stone. For teens, for college students, more individual sessions, but also some sessions with just the parents. Tell me what I'm not hearing. Maybe some family sessions. And I always tell the parents, send me an email if there's anything I need to know. So you don't get one of those situations where you have this great session with a teenager and then like you call the parent in, you schedule for next time. They're like, oh, did he mention he's failing 2 classes? And you're like, oh, weird, that didn't come up. So um, I would rather know about those 2 classes in an email before I meet with a teenager so I can kind of work it in. Um, and that just in general, whatever good work you're doing in session, it's just more likely to stick when there's a parent somehow involved in it. So, in terms of the goals of therapy, there's the individual, there's the family, and then there's the couple. So, and obviously this is always tailored to the age. So if it's a 6-year-old, this is obviously very different than if it's a 16-year-old. But some of this is increasing self-awareness, which is probably always a goal of therapy, but self-awareness of the cognitive impacts of ADHD, right? It makes it more likely that you're going to be distracted and that you're going to be forgetful and you're going to procrastinate and just sort of understanding, oh, this is why these things are harder for me, even though these other things are really easy. Also, to go a little bit deeper, self-awareness of the sort of secondary coping mechanisms, right? If you tend to be forgetful, it might be tempting to sort of lie or cover up or at least sort of waffle a bit when your parent says, you got any homework? What do you got going on? Or how did that test work out? I don't think the teacher handed it back yet. So, getting into some of the deeper ways that ADHD is impacting their behavior and the family dynamic. Generally speaking, obviously, like increasing the client's sense of agency and their integrity in managing responsibilities, right? So there's less chaos, there's less deflection and defensiveness and whatever. If it's your job to do, please just do it. Certainly integrating an understanding of what ADHD is and isn't into how they see themselves, right? So that there's a solid sense of self-esteem. Generally healthy and balanced relationships, right? So they're not, I don't know, bullies to other kids, but they also don't let themselves be treated poorly, right? Because I always forget and run late. I need to tolerate the fact that my friends aren't nice to me, right? Well, no, I don't think that's true. Healthy and balanced lifestyle. So, like sleep, diet, and exercise. Teenagers are not famous for this in the first place. Teenagers with ADHD, especially not famous with managing sleep, diet, and exercise, which, by the way, makes them a lot less fun to hang out with, also, besides the fact that it also makes it harder to get their work done. And then, because ADHD often doesn't travel alone, addressing any other comorbidities, so anxiety, depression, eating issues, substance use issues, terrible sleep habits, or even a sleep disorder, right? Addressing any other stuff that's going on. Now, for the family, then what we're looking to do is understand all the ways that ADHD impacts this kid. It's not just, oh, she doesn't pay attention in English class. It's also when your kid says, when you say, hey, can you do this? And they say, sure, I'll do that. And then somehow they don't, they're not being disrespectful. They're not being oppositional. They're just forgetting. They forget their own stuff too. So don't take it personally. Now, that doesn't mean you let it go, but don't let it affect your ego. And therefore, you got to like come down hard on your kid and whatever, right? Like, there's better ways to help your child, I don't know, remember the thing you asked them, for example. Definitely working on that right balance between freedom and oversight. Because, I mean, I think if we boil down parenting, it's this. What do you let your kid do on their own? What do you do for them? And from birth to launch, right, it goes like this, right? It's sort of more and more of that responsibility transfers to the child. But how do you find that right balance? Especially when your kid has ADHD and is not as consistent in what they do, is maybe a bit more impulsive, is a bit more distracted and forgetful. That becomes a much more, I don't know, heated discussion, let's say. Um, Definitely, obviously parents need to be able to discipline their kids, but we want to do discipline in the right way so it actually teaches the right lesson and not the wrong lesson. Definitely, we want to work on respectful communication so nobody's freaking out and yelling at other people and sort of emotionally dumping on others, whether it's the kid or the parent. And that generally speaking, everyone takes responsibility for what they need to do before the situation and also takes responsibility afterwards if there's something that needs to be addressed. Now, for the couple, meaning the parents, for any of us, there's the dynamic we have between like, the two romantic partners, but that can be potentially magnified or the negatives can be magnified if one of the kids is more challenging. I mean, it can also be magnified for lots of other reasons that makes life stressful, but certainly if you're struggling with one of your kids, and especially if the kid you're struggling with looks a lot like the other parent, it can really kind of magnify those dynamics. So if a parent has ADHD, which frankly is pretty good bet, if someone wants to bet money on that with you, you should probably take the bet because there's pretty good odds one of those parents also has ADHD. Um, is a parent with ADHD too easy? Because, like, hey, this is hard, I know it, and they're over identifying? Or alternatively, are they too hard, right? I had to do it. I found a way to be successful. They need to be successful too, right? Too easy, too hard. Neither extreme is helpful. Let's find the right balance for this kid at this moment in their life, at this sort of point in history and what the world is. Um, or is the parent sort of taking out their frustration on their kid on the other parent? So we might do some individual sessions. We might do some sessions with just the parents where we're doing parenting stuff, where we're also doing relationship stuff. Maybe one of the parents needs to be on medication, or there's a referral out to somebody else, right? Sometimes the kid's only as good as the parents are doing. Now, the challenge with ADHD then. So, besides the symptoms that are in the DSM, like the official kind of diagnostic criteria, ultimately the sort of core of ADHD is this on this one slide. And I have a whole presentation on this, but we're going to keep it quick here. That in general, folks with ADHD tend to have a shorter time horizon for what their age is. In other words, how far out into the future are they thinking? So if you have a big assignment due on Friday and today is Monday, are you sort of thinking about Friday, right? And obviously, like young kids don't think as far out into the future. If you tell a 5-year-old on Monday what's going to happen on Friday, it's too abstract. It doesn't mean much to them. But by the time you get to be, I don't know, sort of middle school, you should probably be thinking at least 1 week out. And if you think about what the lead time on homework assignments is, across the different grades, it kind of matches, right? Developmentally, it matches about how far out kids of that age are thinking. So the implication of this is that folks with ADHD tend to be really big procrastinators, not because they don't care and not because they're being oppositional, but they're just not sort of thinking far enough out into the future. And then all of a sudden the future has become the present, right? So that big assignment on Friday doesn't mean anything on Monday or on Tuesday, probably not much on Wednesday, but Thursday night, oh my God, I've got this big paper. And now all of a sudden they're kind of feeling it. Now, I've got a joke that untreated ADHD often causes anxiety, but it's not always in the person with ADHD, right? So this is the situation where the parents are like, "Oh my God, you've got a paper," and the teenager's like, "Yeah, I know, but whatever, I'll get there." So part of this is sort of seeing time, or is it sometimes it's called time blindness, that folks with ADHD don't see time as clearly. But there's also this idea of feeling the future, right? That what economic or economists call temporal discounting, that the further out a reward or punishment is, the less they feel it now. So if you tell a 13-year-old with ADHD, I will give you $10,000 if you get all A's this year, at the start of the year, it's not really going to be motivating enough in September. It will be in May, but the problem is they've already like gotten too many bad grades before that they can't get straight A's anymore. And even on Monday, saying if you don't get your homework done, you're not going to go out this weekend, maybe too far away. They don't feel it. It doesn't motivate them as much as, texting their friends or playing video games is much more kind of motivating in the moment. So, one of the ways of thinking about this is that ADHD is basically too much present and not enough future, right? That folks with ADHD, their attention and their actions get sort of hijacked by whatever is more interesting or more intense or more salient in the present moment. And therefore, they're not sort of thinking about or feeling the future consequences of what's coming later, right? So, this is why kids with ADHD might have like 15 missing homework assignments that they hand in the last few days of the marking period, right? Because earlier they don't really feel it, but as they're coming right up against it, now they do. Or another way of saying it is the sort of slogan of ADHD time management is by the time you feel it, it's too late, right? Thursday night, big assignment due tomorrow, it's too late. I missed 10 homework assignments. I have like a C minus in math. And now, the marking period ends in a week. It's too late, right? Like maybe the teacher won't accept it, or you haven't done enough of the reading, or it's now summer before senior year and you're looking at colleges and your GPA is nowhere near what it needs to be for the colleges you would like to go to, right? It is now too late to go back. Or you said that thing in the middle of class that seemed hilarious to you and might be hilarious to your friends, but is definitely much less hilarious to the teacher, and it's too late. Like you cannot take it back, or you sent the text in the group chat that again seemed like a good idea in the moment, but then everyone has screenshotted it and now you're in serious trouble, right? It's like it is too late. Now, Russell Barkley, who is, I think, like indisputably the world's expert on ADHD and has this humongous body of work that he has done, has a famous line where he says ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do. It's a disorder of doing what you know. And I think it really kind of captures it, right? Because again, ADHD is about executive functions, it's about those life management skills. So kids with ADHD know the deal, right? You should brush your teeth. You shouldn't talk out in class. You should do your homework. The bus comes at 7:43. You should be out the door at 7:41. Like these are not hard concepts. They get it. And the challenge then is doing the right thing at the right moment, at least most of the time. Maybe not every single time, but at least most of the time. And that folks with ADHD are just more often, that's that inconsistency. They're more often kind of missing the mark. So, um, so let's dive into the sort of like K to eighth grade, kind of give or take. I mean, different schools may have different cuts for middle school and high school, but so that's a bit of the theory. Let's get into the sort of practical implications. Like, what do we do with this now? I've mentioned several times that folks with ADHD are less consistent in applying their executive functions. So therefore, they tend to be more forgetful. They're more disorganized. Like their desk looks like a disaster. Their room, looks like a tornado came through it. They tend to be big procrastinators. They'll often lose track of time even with good intentions. And even in like a moment, they lose track of time and they therefore tend to run late, which, stresses out the people around them. Often folks with ADHD struggle with sleep. They tend to be night owls. They tend to, again, if you're procrastinating, they're doing homework late that they could have done earlier, or they just get into bed and they can't quiet their mind enough to actually like drift into sleep. Often tend to have not great eating habits. So sometimes eating too much, sometimes not eating enough, then coming home and being kind of hangry monsters when they walk off of the school bus. So all of this just makes life harder. That if you're already forgetful and distractible, let's say, having a bunch of junk in your room makes it harder to pay attention to homework, makes it harder to remember, like, oh, right, I have to take this, I completed this worksheet. I have to put it in my backpack and take it to school tomorrow. So part of the intervention, part of what we may sort of talk about and suggest to our families then is how do we reduce some of that chaos, right? And my thing is, I don't care what it looks like. I'm not about aesthetics. I am much more about functionality first. My mother-in-law would have a different opinion, but that's okay. I don't live with her, so we're fine. But in other words, what is going to help this kid do the right thing in the right way at the right time and place? So, very much about function. And sometimes we need to like reduce the chaos to increase the function, but also sometimes with some parents, we need to actually get them to come back. Like, again, my personal opinion, my mother-in-law is going to disagree with me. I do not care if you make your bed. Like, seriously, it is not affecting your functionality. Make your bed if you want, but that is like the very last thing. If you're worrying about making your bed, you're putting if the parent is all stressed about they don't make their bed in the morning, I'm like, are they getting to the school bus? Do they have everything in their backpack that they need? If you can say yes to every other thing, then we can talk about whether they need to make their bed. So, some of this is kind of picking battles, and with some parents, we need to get them to sort of scale back a little bit. Now, obviously, the kids don't want to do it, so they're going to fight you on it. But that's okay, right? So we need to kind of sell it to them, and this will make your life less stressful, kind of a way. Um, and again, with the parents, we need to sort of figure out we need to push them to a bit more, or we need to rein them back to a bit less. Now, because folks with ADHD have less sort of internal control, meaning right? If here I am in math class and the teacher's talking and I'm watching, but there's somebody over here like tap, 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 like tapping their pencil. The kids without ADHD, they hear it, right? Because their ears work, but in a rather automatic, kind of effortless way, they're just kind of like, well, doesn't matter, not important. What's the teacher saying about that test tomorrow? Whereas a kid with ADHD, their attention gets sort of hijacked more easily. So they are hearing and looking at, okay, wait, what's that? And then they don't hear the teacher said there's a math test tomorrow, and they will swear on the biggest stack of Bibles, she did not say we need to bring a red pen tomorrow. She never did. Definitely not. It didn't happen. And somehow, 23 other kids managed to hear it. Um, so if you're less able to sort of manage your internal attention, it just makes it more important to manage the environment, which is why the sort of classic accommodation for kids with ADHD is you put them at the front of the class. Teacher's bigger in their attention, and they're not looking through 4 rows of like interesting, distracting kids before they see the teacher, right? So, how do we make the signal stronger? How do we make the noise weaker? Same deal for when you're doing homework, I want you to do it down at the kitchen table because that way you're not distracted with the stuff in your room. Or alternatively, your little sister and the dog are running around in the dining room table, so let's actually put you upstairs or let's put you in this room, we'll close the door or whatever. So the line I will sometimes use is don't set kids up for failure and the parents up for disappointment. And as much as I'm all in favor of willpower, I'm also not actually that impressed by it. Like, too often, willpower fails us, right? That thing of like, don't get distracted by distractions. It doesn't work that well. If it did, this kid wouldn't have ADHD, and none of us are perfect anyway. So, how do we set up a better work environment? How do we make a more streamlined flow through the morning routine or whatever it is that we're talking about? In order to manage attention, we're sometimes therefore kind of managing the environment, right? That means distractions and temptations. Now, the sort of like the stereotype is you put the kid at a desk in a quiet place and that will be their best option. But not always, right? Some kids actually do better with music. Some kids do better if they're sitting on their bed. Like, I don't care what you're doing as long as it's like legal and moral, but like as long as it works. So let's run an experiment. You say you do better with music. All right, let's find out. Let's see. We'll try some music. We'll see how much work you get done. And if it takes you twice as long, I mean, on the one hand, if you get it done without a fight, then maybe who cares, right? That's fine. If 20 minutes takes 40, that's fine. If you get to high school and 2 hours takes 4 hours, we may not have 4 hours, but like if this works, then that's okay. Um, on the other hand, the kid, this is like the classic middle school line, or well, hell, anyone. Oh yeah, I can get my work done even if I have my cell phone there. And you're like, well, let's actually find out. The problem is every time something pings our attention, it takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of executive control to say, uh, okay, no, not that. Oh, yep, nope, nope, here's what I'm doing. And the more times our attention gets pinged, the more that sort of mental resource runs down. And therefore, at some point, you will get pulled off, and now you're on your phone and you're not doing your geometry homework. So, you know, kind of having a bit of a conversation about this. And if you run the experiment and it doesn't work out, then I think we need to do something different, my friend. Now, in terms of homework, obviously homework is always a thing for a lot of families, or it's often a thing for a lot of families. In general, I want kids to have as much freedom as they can handle. Like if you can do your homework and your parents don't have to say anything about it, that's everybody's benefit. Your parents have better things to do and you don't want to hear it from them anyway. So if you can do it, awesome. Unfortunately, for a lot of kids with ADHD, except for possibly the really anxious, kind of highly conscientious kids, which tend to skew more female than male, they may have enough angst about it and enough self-pressure that they can get their homework done. Although we may worry about their level of anxiety, but for the other kids, probably the amount of oversight they need is more than they want, right? That's pretty safe bet. It might also be more than what their age is, right? So if a parent says like, well, he's 12, he should be able to do his homework by now. I mean, I don't know. I suppose we could debate developmental norms and all, but the reality is he isn't, right? Like that's the bottom line. He's not. And punishing isn't working, right? Because again, not feeling the consequences until it's too late. So I think we need a plan B here. Now, one of the things that I suggest to parents is in the beginning of the year, but obviously if they come in May, then we talk about this in May, is ask the teachers about their kind of homework patterns, ask the teachers about their test patterns and expectations. That, so when your kid says, nope, no geometry homework tonight either, the parent can say, like, wait a second, the teacher said they give homework every single night. So that seems weird. Also asking where things actually get posted, because having an online grade, like Canvas or Blackboard or whatever is awesome, except it's only as good as a teacher. And if they're not posting it where it should be, where are they posting it? Let's really find out. I think it's also generally good advice that either the student or the parents, depending on the kid's age, identify at least one kid in every class who they can somehow reach out to for clarification of like, okay, so wait, what's the homework? What do we need to do? Or like, hey, tell me more about this project they have coming up. Like, I'm not entirely clear, so that the parent and student isn't getting into this debate about what the teacher really meant for them to do or whatever. You can just call or text someone and kind of like get it figured out. Now, of course, the challenge then is if a student isn't doing what they need to do, we need to be able to figure out why. Like, why is that? What is getting in the way of doing what they need to do? And often parents, teachers tend to sort of go to rewards and punishment. If you get a good grade on the test, you can go out this weekend, or if you don't do your homework, then you don't get your cell phone tomorrow or whatever. And like rewards and punishment are fine, right? Like they are indeed a part of life. We get paid at the end of the week. It helps you show up to work on Monday. But the thing about it is rewards and punishment increase motivation, but don't increase skills. And as an example, if I said to a kid, I will give you $1 million dollars, or I will let you use your cell phone 24/7 if you can jump up and touch the ceiling in my office. Huge motivation. They don't have a 7-foot vertical leap. They just can't do it. Or if I say, I will smash your cell phone and never again will you be online until you turn 18, again, lots of motivation. That punishment is incredibly motivating. They still don't have the vertical leap to touch the ceiling. And this is sometimes then the sort of the place where things go sideways with these kids is that the parents and teachers see it as a problem of motivation, and therefore rewards and punishment are the solution. But if it's really about skills, which doesn't mean the skill of being able to do geometry problem, like factor a polynomial equation or whatever, that sounds like a math thing. It's not that they can't do the math, it's that they can't pay attention enough to do all of the homework, or they don't even remember that they had homework, or they're not organized enough to look to see what the homework actually is. Obviously, we want our kids to be motivated, but we also want them to have the right skills. So, therefore, I think it can be helpful then to sort of to sort of separate this out, right? Is this a problem of motivation? Is it a problem of skills? Truthfully, it's probably a bit of both. But the way, at least if we're talking about homework, the sort of strategy I tend to suggest to parents, and I'll talk to the kid or teen about it, is this. Set some sort of a measurable grade standard, right? In other words, you need to be in all your classes, or you need to be in all your classes except I know your science class is a real killer for you, so like that just needs to be a C, or you can only miss two homeworks in a week, or whatever it is, but some sort of objectively measurable standard that we can all look at it and we can all interpret the data in the same way. Then we set a frequency for by which the parent is going to check the online grade book. This might be every day, possibly once a week if you're talking about older teenagers, but probably more often is better than less often. And then we set, like if you hit the mark, right, you got all B's or better, or you didn't miss more than two homeworks or whatever it is. If you hit it, here's what you get. If you fall short, here's what we take away. So just as a simple example, if you're over the line, you get to use your cell phone at night until bedtime. If you're under the line, sorry, man, no cell phone. If we're checking it every other day, if you hit the mark, you get your cell phone until the next check. If you hit the mark again, you get it again, et cetera, et cetera. If you fall short, I take your cell phone, and 2 days from now on the schedule, we check it again. If you're now over the line, cool, here's your cell phone again. If you're under the line, sorry, I wish you good luck in 2 days, right? And you only go by what the website says. There's none of this, I handed it in, but the teacher hasn't graded it yet. If I send the electric company a check and they don't post it to my account, they will not be convinced when I call them up and say, no, but I did mail it. I think the mailman lost it. They're not going to, change what it says in their system just because I said I mailed the check. So we go by what the website says. Now, what this does then, the sort of the benefit of this is it helps align everybody's motivations. Parents want the kid to get some good grades and get their homework done. The kid maybe wants good grades, but certainly wants their cell phone or whatever it is. And that way, everybody's pointed in the same direction. Whereas without this, there's a possibility that if the kid doesn't do their homework, I mean, sure, they got mom and dad yelling at them, but like, whatever, it's less terrible than doing their homework. And besides, my parents don't really follow through on stuff anyway, or whatever, or it's just too awful to do the homework. I'll take anything instead. So it aligns everybody's motivations. And if we know that this kid is motivated to get their cell phone, but they keep falling short, now we start thinking about skills, right? What is getting in the way? What is it about how we're doing this, how we're handling homework, let's say, that it still isn't working? So now let's start messing around with that. Let's try this, let's try that. Let's see what it takes to get this kid on track. Also, what it does is it shortens the space between action and consequence. And as I kind of said in the beginning, if the consequence is too far away in time, the kid doesn't feel it when it matters. But if they're thinking in their head, my teacher grades homework pretty quick. If I don't hand it in, I probably don't get my cell phone tomorrow. That might be a motivator in that moment. But also, and this is part of the sales pitch to the kid, is parents cannot pile on with lectures, right? It is only this. Sorry, you don't get your cell phone. There's none of this. Why aren't you doing your homework? We've talked about this. What about your grades? Blah, blah, blah. All that like Charlie Brown's teacher, wah, 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 wah kind of stuff. We're not going there, right? So it spares the kid the lecture that doesn't do them any good anyway. If things are not working out, we may shorten it, right? So instead of twice a week, we're going to do it 3 times a week or every day. If you're doing pretty good, then we'll start stretching it out, right? And so the frequency can be part of how we make this work. Maybe we change the frequency, maybe we change the reward or punishment, maybe we realize, okay, this isn't working. What are the missing skills? What additional support is needed? Now, in general, I tend to suggest to the parents of my ADHD kids and teens that they have a bit more communication with the folks at school. Now, I've certainly gotten gigantic emails from parents. If they're sending me giant emails, I'm sure you've gotten giant emails too. They're probably sending the teachers giant emails. Teachers don't have enough time. Like they do not have time to read giant emails. They don't have time to read multiple emails a week. So part of what I sort of talk to those parents about is really picking their battles and boiling down to the most important things, being really respectful of busy teachers. And you always want the teacher on your side, even if they're doing stuff you don't like. You need to deal with it, you need to address it, but don't piss off your kid's teacher. It makes everything so much worse. Or just don't annoy your kid's teacher. So talk to the teacher. What can we do at home to support what you're doing at school? What are the most important things? And if it's not going well, where can we flex? So, for example, if you've got a kid who, like a fifth grader, who takes an hour to do their math problems and it's just like a death march and everybody's crying and it just makes them hate school, hate math, hate themselves, like not worth it, right? So I think maybe you talk to the teacher and say like, look, how much is enough where we're like, we're done. And the parent draws a line and initials it, and says, look, that's as good as it's going to be. Or the teacher just makes a strategic parenting decision that this is not worth the misery. Fine, you pretty much know how to do this kind of math. We're moving on, right? And maybe their grade's a little bit lower, but maybe the kid's self-esteem and the relationship with the parent is worth more than a slightly higher GPA, especially if it's a homework assignment that's only worth a couple points anyway. Screen time, obviously, that's kind of an issue probably for the entire universe, but especially kids with ADHD who tend to be impulsive, tend to be forgetful. I haven't even been on my phone today. Well, except for the 4 other times. Or I've only been on it for a couple minutes, but it's actually been like 45 minutes, right? That kids with ADHD are really bad at self-limiting their screen time. And not because they're lying, but because they're just not tracking it well. And also, honestly, their screens are always more interesting than any homework they need to do and any chores or brushing teeth or going to bed that parents are going to ask them to do. So I think sometimes then, if it's too much of a battle, getting one of those screen time managers, which is more than just the like onboard in, built into the OS kind of stuff. Also, by the way, when it says you've now been on, YouTube for 6 hours today and you swipe it away, worthless, doesn't help. So what I'm talking about is one of these, software, like an app, whatever, that you load onto the phone. The parents have the admin rights and they can limit, right? 1 hour of YouTube a day or no YouTube from 4 to 6 when you're doing homework, or your phone internet shuts off at 9:30 because that's bedtime, right? That it takes away the fight so the parents don't have to try to track it, which they can't, or get into this battle with physically taking the phone from the kid. If getting out the door and messing around on their phone makes everybody late, then we just don't have phones in the morning. Like that's it. Like that's the simple solution. Or anytime it's too problematic, or you're posting stuff online, that's an issue, then we take away the app, like whatever it is. And the line I have here is if it's too hard to stop, then we can't start. If you come home from school, get a snack, spend some time on your phone, and then it's a battle to get off so you can do your homework, then I think we don't get on our phone when we come home from school, right? Show me you can get off, then we'll be able to get on. And it might be that you need to literally write out what else can you do instead? What can you do that is not on your phone? I know the universe is boring and nothing else is as interesting, but just for the sake of argument, let's try to think of a couple things that maybe you could do, right? So you write it out. So when the kid is like worked up and can't think of anything else to do, we got the list. Let's take a look. Mornings, I think, are hard for most families, and obviously when there's school buses involved, which come when they come, they're even more stressful. So we don't want a situation, we want to minimize the number of mornings or everybody's yelling at everyone. And it's this mad dash scramble out the door. Now, I often will, I've got a line that morning problems are often night problems, right? If your mornings are bad, what isn't happening the night before? Are you getting into bed too late? Maybe you need to get stuff ready the night before, and maybe doing your homework. Part of the definition of doing your homework is everything is put in your backpack. It's all wrapped up. You've got the thing off of the printer. You've got your water bottle in your bag. You got your soccer stuff. Like doing your homework means everything is back, not like scattered throughout the house. If you use an alarm to wake up and you can't wake up, then we just need a louder alarm, and maybe it needs to be across the room and not next to your bed, or maybe you need three alarms across the room, whatever it takes to make it happen. It can also be helpful because of the fact that kids with ADHD are not awesome at tracking time, to have like kind of a clear routine, right? The alarm goes off at 6:30. You need to be out of your room by 6:40. So we're going to write 6:40, slap a post-it note on the back of the door. You need to be then in the bathroom, do whatever you do. So let's say at 6:55, you're coming out. So we're going to put 6:55 on the door jamb in the bathroom, and then you're getting dressed. So let's say 7, and then you're down in the kitchen, right? So like shortening up these blocks of time. So it's not just this wash of time that they sort of wander through. And then in the last 5 minutes, the parents are freaking out. So getting a bit more specific about what needs to happen in the morning and probably minimizing how much needs to happen. Kids with ADHD, especially those who have more of the hyperactive impulsive symptoms, are at a significantly greater risk for sort of oppositional behavior, which makes everything much, much harder for the parents and also, frankly, for the kid. And some of this is that those who have the more hyperactive impulsive symptoms tend to be more kind of emotionally reactive. They tend to give more of a, pushback to any time someone is sort of pushing them to do something. So I do believe some of this is about like neurobiology, but it's also some of it is about experience that kids who are more off task, especially kids who are restless and impulsive, get a lot more adult corrections and not always nicely in the best way. So some of this is about kind of psychology and relationships as well. Kids who have other comorbidities, so maybe there's some bipolar in there, maybe they're somewhere on the spectrum, or they're anxious or depressed, right? The more other stuff is going on, the more likely there's going to be oppositionality, and it's going to be harder to manage it. If a kid is oppositional at home with parents, but is an angel at the neighbors and at school, as much as on the one hand, it makes the parents insane that they're like, yeah, you saved that for me. On the other hand, it is a much, much better prognosis. If your kid is oppositional at home and also at school, that is a much harder situation. It is much, much more important to address it seriously as early as possible, right? There are much worse life outcomes for kids who are oppositional outside of the home. So we definitely need to take this seriously. Now, of course, when it comes to oppositionality, it's kind of by the time they show up in your office, it's kind of hard to know, like, well, where did this come from? Because on the one hand, a kid who is more rigid about how things need to happen, who is generally more reactive to the adults around them, will tend to sort of push the parents harder, right? They're going to evoke more extreme reactions, which doesn't help their oppositionality and reactivity. But also, parents who are themselves kind of rigid about what needs to be done or how it needs to be done or when it needs to be done, who are themselves more emotionally reactive, will also evoke more extreme reactions from their kids who are genetically related and share some of these traits. Now, parents who are too demanding will evoke more reactivity, but also parents who are too permissive, right? So there's a risk on both ends of the spectrum. Ideally, we want their parents somewhere in the middle. The kid is going to complain about the parents, and the parents are going to complain about the kid. And maybe one parent will complain about the other parent too. So everybody's pointing fingers. If a kid is oppositional, you're not only going to meet with a kid, you have to meet with the parents. And maybe you do some shuttle diplomacy, you meet with the parents separate, meet with the kid, you meet with the parents, you meet with the kid. If it's too volatile in session, first of all, as the therapist, you need to be a strong leader in those sessions. But if it's still too volatile, then you just meet with them separately until you can finally meet with them together. And if there are any other comorbidities going on, we absolutely need to address any other comorbidities in the kid or in either of the parents. So again, really serious, really important to actively address this kind of behavior or dynamic. We're going to talk about meds in a little bit, but generally speaking, the stimulant medication that's, by far the most effective for ADHD can reduce some of that reactivity, gives kids and adults a bit of a longer fuse, also gives a bit of an easier transition. I have a friend of mine who's a developmental pediatrician, does a lot of presenting in the world of ADHD, guy named Mark Burton. And we were talking recently, and he actually said that adding an SSRI to these kind of reactive kids that takes down their anxiety can actually really be helpful with oppositionality as well. In terms of parenting styles, so the most effective parenting style for most kids, but especially for more reactive kids, is an authoritative. That is not authoritarian, but an authoritative parenting style, meaning reasonable expectations based on who your kid is and who they are at this moment in their life. So you're not asking them to do more than they can do. Clearly communicating expectations. So not just you need to do better, but I would like you to get your, math homework done before we have dinner. Appropriate consequences. So it can't be this thing of like, that's it, you're grounded all month, or I'm never gonna, you're never gonna get your phone back or whatever, because your kid knows that's a lie. So appropriate consequences and with short delays, right? So it can't be a thing of that's it, you're not going out this weekend when it's Monday, because that doesn't mean anything until Friday. Now you can empathize with your child's emotions. I understand you're frustrated, or I understand you're disappointed that, you got, knocked out in that video game, or that you can't go out with your friends now or whatever. Like, I get it. I know you're really frustrated or you're really sad or, right? So empathizing, but there also comes a point, it's like, okay, we need to stop talking about this. Like, we've talked about it, we need to move on. And there absolutely need to be consequences for pestering, right? Can I play video games? Can I play? Can I play? Can I play? Can I play? And they eventually break the parent. Like, here's the deal. My dog has figured out that if you continue to pester, eventually you do get a bit of something from the dinner table. So if my dog can figure it out, your kid can totally figure it out. So I have said no. Do not ask me again. If you ask me about video games, then you will not have video games tomorrow. That's it. We are done. Right? Calmly, firmly, not freaking out, and also not giving in. Now, especially with kids, a lot of parents are hesitant about medication, especially for kind of the little guys. They're especially hesitant. But often the hesitation is based in kind of inaccurate or exaggerated concerns about what are the risks of medication, or, how beneficial could they even be, or what if we just do whatever, right? Change their diet, I don't know, use a star chart, wouldn't that be enough? And the answer is probably no. No, it won't. And we're going to talk again, we'll talk a bit more about meds, but in general, the way to think about medication is it closes a gap between intentions and actions. Here's the plan, here I am doing it. Um, it just helps folks with ADHD be more on top of what they need to do. It helps their executive functions work a bit more reliably. Now, obviously, when it comes to medication or lots of parenting decisions, it's the parents and the family who needs to decide. It's not for me to decide. I don't get votes on what any family does except my own. And it might be a thing where it's like, look, we don't have to do medication. Like we really don't. But I think if we don't, then we need to accept the fact that your kid is probably going to continue to get in trouble at school. You're going to continue to have issues with getting homework done. You're going to continue to have issues with getting into it with their siblings. Like, if those are acceptable to you, we don't have to do medication. We really don't. But you also kind of can't have it both ways. So maybe we need to kind of think about what are your big priorities here? Um, so before we go to medication, let's take a minute or two and let's do some questions. I got to pop up that Melissa has a question.
I do. So I've been doing some reading lately about the rejection sensitive dysphoria
Yep.
as a part of ADHD. And I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit. That's new to me.
Yeah. Um, so rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, as it's kind of abbreviated, is kind of as it sounds. It's a strong, kind of visceral response to actual or perceived rejection or criticism. And it's not an official diagnostic criteria of ADHD, but many people with ADHD tend to experience it. And obviously it's not a pleasant experience. It can also lead to kind of like big external reactions, or perhaps just like, internal withdrawing. Um, so in terms of how we manage it, there's a couple medications, guanfacine and clonidine, that seem to have some benefit. I think there's probably also like DBT strategies can sometimes be helpful. I think in general, just reducing stress and chaos and whatever, and just helping the person feel more on top of their life, feel a bit better about themselves. General emotion regulation strategies, I think, can be helpful in terms of managing it, but it's something to sort of keep an eye out for, especially perhaps with broad statement here, but like the very sort of conscientious young girls who are highly anxious and really want to please and don't want to do things badly and don't want to, draw negative attention, might be especially kind of sensitive to these RSD reactions.
I have a question in the chat
Hmm.
about getting parents' buy-in,
Hmm.
noting that this is a common frustration, and you are speaking of heavy parent involvement, and they just want to know, how are you getting these parents to be involved?
Yeah. I mean, I think so like there is a sales pitch on this, right? That you do need to sort of explain it to them, that it's not like dropping your kid off for a haircut, right? That is not going to get the job done here. And it's really about kind of empowering them. Like, I want to talk about, I want to kind of teach you more about ADHD so you understand better how to manage it. And that so that you can feel more effective as a parent and you can have more time enjoying each other and more positive moments and less time kind of wrestling with your kid to do what they need to do, or fewer kind of fights that then kind of cast this dark shadow over the rest of the night. So like that's kind of part of the sales pitch. And it just I don't know. Like it's just sort of a thing of like, look, this just isn't going to work. Like in my experience, just dropping your kid off and me working with them, it isn't going to work. If they could do it, they would already be doing it and you wouldn't be here paying me. So like this is kind of a family thing and we're going to work on ways to work better together. So you sweet talk them and if need be, you just hold the line. You're just like, look, this is what it's going to take and it's not going to work if you're not involved.
I I had a question. I'm a case manager uh in a school and in
Mhm.
a middle school. I work with a lot of kids with ADHD, ODD, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So I I have ADHD myself. And I understand where the kids are coming from a lot, but I'm struggling to help them to explain it to their parents and for me to explain it to their parents, for them to be more involved and mirror the same things at home that I'm trying to do at the school.
Yeah.
But specifically, I'm struggling with things like impulses, like stealing, skin picking, and the defiance. So I was just curious if there's anything specific that you have or certain resources that I can find that I can provide to parents to try and help bridge that gap from school to home on those issues.
Yeah. I do think that finding some resources that you really like that kind of speak well to your population of kids, I think it can be really helpful. So whether it's, some YouTube videos or some handouts or other things like that. Russell Barkley has a book, I want to say it's called The Defiant Child, that can be really helpful. So like that would be something. But I think some of it is really sort of like educating the parents that this is not by choice, right? There's a line by Ross Greene that kids do well when they can, because doing well is always better than doing badly, right? If this kid could just do what they needed to do, like they wouldn't get into the battle. Like it doesn't serve them ultimately, right? They would do better in their days if they could just kind of get along and get things done. So we just need to find some better ways for them to manage that. In terms of medication, I'm a psychologist. I don't prescribe. I'm going to assume probably nobody or maybe only a handful of people are prescribers. But even so, as a therapist or someone who talks to people, you got to know the medications that are used for ADHD to be most effective. In that, back to Barclay's line, ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do, it's a disorder of doing what you know. The medication for ADHD helps people do what they know. It helps them be more consistent about what they need to do. And as much as I love strategies, I've written 5 books worth of strategies. Strategies don't work when you don't use them, right? So things like when the teacher says something really important about the test coming up, write it down so you can remember it, obviously. But the problem is if the kid is distracted and not paying attention, if they're sort of scrambling, putting their stuff away, and they're like, oh, well, remember, I'll write that down when I get to my next class, they probably won't, right? So sometimes a bit of the right medication can make all the difference. Now, part of why it's important for us as the therapist to know the meds well is that the sad reality is too many of the people prescribing medication for ADHD don't know enough about them. Now, this could mean that pediatricians, although there are some amazing pediatricians, there's also psychiatrists who somehow don't know ADHD medication well, which kind of boggles my mind and frankly makes me angry. But either they don't know enough about ADHD or the medication, or they just don't have enough time, right? To their to their defense, like they just don't have enough time to really figure it out, whereas we have much more time. We also see our people much more often, so we can really figure out what's going on here. In that, you know, the idea of talking to parents or kids and teens about medication is the goal is to make an informed, well thought out decision, right? I'm going to tell you accurate things about medication. I'm going to discuss, what's this and what's that, and is it true and is it not, and right. But at the end of the day, the client makes the decision. But my job is to ensure they at least have accurate information for that decision. Now, of course, the elephant in the room is I don't want to put my kid on meds. They're going to become a drug addict. And my smart ass response is if stimulants are really so addictive, why do so many of my clients forget to take them? No heroin addict has ever forgotten their heroin. It is not a thing that happens. So I think if you forget to take it, if you don't want to take it, by definition, you are not addicted, right? Like just plain and simple, you are not addicted. And if we, give me one quick sec. Okay, so in terms of this, then, kids with ADHD are at a significant risk for substance abuse problems in adolescence and adulthood, especially those with the hyperactive impulsive symptoms. Kids with ADHD put on medication are at perhaps a reduced risk of substance abuse problems. Adults with ADHD who are in sobriety are more likely to stay sober on a stimulant than they are off a stimulant, which 100% makes sense when you understand ADHD and how the stimulants work. So, like, we absolutely should be concerned about substance abuse, but keeping kids off of stimulants increases their risk for substance abuse problems. So, um, in terms of what they do, they help the executive functions work more effectively. In as much as stimulants make you think that they make people like, oh, I'm full of energy, um, they increase alertness the way that caffeine does, but they're actually much more brake fluid than gasoline, right? That they improve response inhibition. They make it easier to kind of pause and like, maybe I won't tell my friend that hilarious thing in the middle of class. Or what's that noise? Don't care. What's the teacher saying about the math test tomorrow? Right? They give a little bit more pause so the person with ADHD can kind of do that better thing. Or as I kind of said before, they close the gap between intentions and actions. And as much as any treatment has potential risks and side effects, we also need to be clear that there are risks and side effects of untreated ADHD. And I can talk about all the literature and what that says, but possibly more to the point, parents, everything that you are concerned about for your child that motivated you to come to my office and pay me money to help them, those are all the risks and side effects of untreated ADHD. And the actual risks and side effects of the medication are far, far less than that, right? And that's the comparison we need to do. Um, so in terms of the medications that we use, generally speaking, absolutely the first line, first choice medication is the stimulants. Now, the stimulants have been around for decades and decades and decades. Nothing is new in the world of stimulants. The only thing that's new is they're taking old medications and they're repackaging them in different pills, but it's exactly the same stuff. The stimulants are the most researched medication in all of child psychiatry. They are the most effective medication in all of psychiatry. That, in other words, the ADHD meds, the stimulants are better at managing the symptoms of ADHD than the bipolar meds are at managing bipolar symptoms, far better than the antidepressants are at managing depression or anxiety. They are just the most effective medication out there. Now, within the class of stimulants that predominantly impact levels of dopamine, you've got your methylphenidate family and the amphetamine family. Now, methylphenidate is just a generic name for Ritalin or Concerta, which is just an extended release version of Ritalin. So plain old Ritalin lasts 3 or 4 hours, which will not get you through a school day. Concerta ideally lasts about 8 to 12 hours. And I put the kind of standard doses here because often these medications are underdosed and therefore under effective. Now, the amphetamine family, first of all, the amphetamine you buy from drug dealers is importantly different enough chemically from the ADHD meds, right? They do not work the same. They're not used in the same way. Like they are not the same, chemical compound. So you've got short-acting Adderall, which will last you a little bit longer than Ritalin, but still not get you through a school day. Adderall XR, meaning extended release, and then a cousin of Adderall called Vyvanse. So these are the most commonly used medications. All of them are available in generic. Um, Overall, the extend release tend to be preferred. You take it in the morning, hopefully it gets you through the day. It also means you don't have to remember a pill in the middle of the day, which most people don't remember. And at school, you can't give your kid a pill to put in their pocket and then remember to take at lunch. You got to give it to the nurse and then hope your kid actually shows up in the nurse's office. Now, there is a place in the world for the short acting. And either it could be like on a Sunday, take a short acting, clean your room, do some homework, go to your sister's soccer game, whatever. Um, or also for the kids whose morning extended release dose doesn't last as long into the evening for homework or just peace in the home, a little bit of the short acting can extend that out a little bit further. In terms of the medication, I kind of slightly facetiously say I am impatient and greedy when it comes to my client's medication regimen. Impatient meaning let's get to a real effective dose quickly, and greedy meaning I want it to work as well as it can. So, in terms of impatience, stimulants you take the pill within an hour, it is doing what it's going to do. It is not an antidepressant that takes weeks and weeks to build up in your system and reveal its effect. You know right away. So you do not need to wait a month between dose increases. The only thing that happens in that month is you waste 3 weeks of this kid's life on a less effective dose of medication. So you can really increase the dose about every 3 to 7 days until you get to the right amount of effect and also the right duration of effect. In terms of greedy, I want the medication to do everything it can. I don't want a half effective medication. I want it to be fully effective. So I'll ask, right? My questions are, can you definitely tell the difference? And if someone's like, yeah, meh, that's not effective. I want a clear, definitive answer. Yes, I can tell when I've taken it. I also want to know, can the teachers and parents tell? Um, Now, one of the ways that we can tell that you're on the right dose of medication is it's lasting as long as it should. So it should last you 10 to 12 hours. If you're down at like 6 hours, you're not at the right dose, right? So as the dose goes up, the duration increases as well as the amount of benefit, also potentially the side effects. The second way to know that you're not yet on the right dose is you increase the dose, and for a day or two or three, they're like, oh, that's pretty good. And then it sort of drops off. Usually that means you need to go up one more time in dose, and then it should be just as effective on day 7 as it was on day 1. In terms of which one to start with, whether it's Concerta or one of the extended release Ritalins or Adderall XR or Vyvanse, overall they're all pretty much the same. And what I tend to recommend is whatever is cheapest or easiest to, reliably get your hands on every month. If it's not working well, maybe the problem is the dose, too low or too high. Maybe it's the delivery mechanism, meaning is it a short acting and it doesn't last long enough, or it's too peak and valley kind of, or maybe it's just the wrong medication, right? So Adderall isn't good for you, but maybe Concerta is, for example. Anyone who doesn't do well on the first medication they try should be tried on a second medication. And if that one's not a winner, they should be tried on the third medication. Like they're not the same molecule. People can absolutely respond differently to one than the other. There's also no taper off. If you take a Concerta today at 8 a.m., by tomorrow morning, it's effectively out of your system. So you can literally take Concerta today, Adderall tomorrow, and Vyvanse the next day. I don't know why you would, but it is completely possible to do so. So we can pretty quickly dial in the right dose of this medication or switch over to something that's going to be better. In terms of the side effects, overall, either they will get better over the course of a few days or a week. I think once you get to about a week or so, it's probably this is what it's going to be. or you can lower the dose. Obviously, side effects improve when you lower the dose, but also desired effects improve unless you sort of overshot and then you come back and you're like, bingo, there it is. Most common side effect that people will get is appetite suppression, meaning less hungry, probably during the day for lunch, but still hungry in the morning before it kicks in, still hungry in the evening. Now, for scrawny, picky eater kids, we're going to worry about this, but not really for adults as much. And even with teenagers, it may have less of an effect, but also the older you get, the more you can eat intentionally and know I'm not super hungry, but I should at least eat something. There's a lot of hoopla out there that like it leads to reduced height. Actually, that has been found to be untrue. When you do a real meta-analysis, there's really no significant reduction in height based on kids who take ADHD medication. The next side effect that people might get is something called rebound, which is at the end of the day, if their blood levels crash out too quickly, that the kid is just cranky, irritable, emotional for this specific half hour, hour of the day, and then they sort of come out of it. So the easiest or the most effective way to address that is a little bit of the short acting right before the drop. And it just slows down their descent if the medication otherwise is really good, or you can try one of the other medications. Some kids will say that they get jittery, and if they're teenagers, always your first question is, tell me about how much caffeine you drink. Tell me about coffee, tell me about, energy drinks, like what are you drinking? Because that's going to be your first question. Or alternatively, they may feel kind of like a zombie, right? They're sort of too flat. They've lost that emotional zing of their personality, so to speak. You got to pull the dose back a little bit. They might complain about trouble sleeping, but so always you need to ask, what was your sleep like before? Because a lot of kids and teens with ADHD will struggle with sleep without medication. So is this a side effect that we need to address by reducing the dose or taking it earlier? Or is this a pre-existing kind of, challenge? Most all of these side effects I mentioned are not, big problems, or at least they're slow moving problems, right? Nobody starves to death in a day or two. There is the possibility, although I think this is really more for adults, of perhaps some elevated blood pressure, perhaps an elevated heart rate. For most healthy kids and teens, this is really not an issue. But if it is an issue, then, obviously you need to kind of keep an eye on it, or the doctor needs to keep an eye on it, or whatever. So let's take, before we kind of jump into high school, let's do some quick questions here.
What options might be on the table for parents or guardians who don't have the financial option to be as heavily involved?
hmm I mean, part of the issue is as parents, we can be involved all afternoon and all weekend. We cannot be involved during the school day, right? There's all that stuff. And that, which then becomes a situation where you need to work with the school and hope that they have the resources and you got lucky on what teacher you got. But like that might be a place where it makes medication seem that much more of a desirable option. Um, so there are also, I mean, the good news is there's a lot of support groups out there, and a lot of them post-pandemic have gone online. So if you go to chad.org, so that's CHADD.org, I don't know what the deal is if there's one near you guys, but again, a lot of this stuff is online. So there are other sort of places to get emotional support, but also kind of strategies and ideas and recommendations.
And there's a question that just got put in about, do you have
Mhm.
any experience with treatment-resistant ADHD or cases where ADHD medications just don't work?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there is a small percentage of folks who just, you run through all three of the stimulants and none of them are really that effective. There are some non-stimulants out there like Strattera as well that have some benefit, but generally for most people is much less than the stimulants. But If none of the main meds work, then you go to the sort of second line non-stimulants. And if none of those work, unfortunately, then you're it's just not an option. And then you're focusing on the more behavioral strategies that you might use. Carrie.
Yes, so I asked this question. So this in particular is for my son. So we've done genetic testing with him, and he doesn't synthesize like any of the typical ADHD medications. It's either he would need so much, he has horrible side effects, or he just
Yeah.
doesn't respond to them at all. And then we've tried other secondary medications, like the SSRIs and different classes of things, and
Yeah.
those almost seem to disinhibit things even further and go the other way. So
Yeah.
it's been a crap shot of trying to figure out medications.
And unfortunately, like there is that small subset where just for
Mhm.
whatever random reasons, none of them really either
Mhm.
they don't work or they're not tolerable. And it's just, I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for you. Possibly there's some stuff in the works that works differently that maybe he would tolerate a little bit better. Um, but yeah, it's just a hard situation in that case. Do you agree that combination medication behavior modification treatment is a good option to treat? Yeah, I mean, medication alone can be helpful, and behavior treatment also can be helpful, but more helpful is when you put them together. So, to the extent that we can, we try to combine as many interventions as possible. Absolutely. Um, there's a question, what's the role for executive function coaches? And does the child with ADHD continue medication for life? So there are a lot of coaches out there, ADHD coaches, executive function coaches. One thing is you cannot teach executive functions, like the core true neurological executive functions cannot be taught. Having said that, some people say I teach executive functions, meaning I work with kids on using their calendar and helping planning and getting organized. That's not technically executive functions in the like neurological definition, but it's more like life management skills that can be helpful. But I think you need to find out what exactly are they doing and how are they doing it. Do they need to continue medication for life? We don't know till we get there. But, the thing is, taking medication today is not like getting a tattoo where you forever have it, right? Medication today means today I take it. Tomorrow is a new day. Next year is a new day. The year after that is a new day, right? Like, so you're only deciding for now. And how much you need meds depends on how well you manage things. It also depends on what your demands are and what you're trying to accomplish in your life. And then let me do this, and then I see there's someone with their hand up, so I'll just do this one from the chat. What about teens who feel like they don't need the medication, and for some time they do well in school without meds, but then struggle with completing tasks at home? Teenagers hate medication, and they'll often say, "I don't like medication." Personally, I think often it's, "I don't like the idea of being a person who needs to take medication." Right? I think it's more about that. As well as the fact that kids and teens and even young adults with ADHD notoriously underreport the extent of their symptoms. I'm doing fine. I'm not that distracted and forgetful. And their parents and teachers are like, dude, you're killing me. Seriously. Or they're not forgetful because their parents are reminding them all the time. So it is not uncommon that they want to take themselves off of meds. It's not uncommon that they take themselves off of meds in college, which is sort of like saying, usually I wear my glasses when I drive, but now that I'm in a new city driving in the rain at night, I don't think I'm going to wear my glasses, right? So a friend of mine recently, he made the recommendation for those kids, you let them go off of their meds the second half of senior year of high school. Your grades no longer matter. It's fine. Let them tank, let them really struggle, let them forget their stuff for soccer and run late to meet their friends and suffer all of the consequences at home in high school where they're much smaller so that they recognize the benefit of taking their medication when they go to college where it really, really matters. So the advice I give is run failable experiments. And we'll talk more about this in the second half here when we get into teenagers. But Let's do a John 25. What do you got?
So, one of the questions that I have is oftentimes when I look at ADHD, I look at it initially when I'm evaluating a patient as a child with autism and the spectrum, because I believe there are some children that may have difficulty focusing. And if given an executive function coach and maybe some medication for 2 to 3 years, they can get back on track. And then there are other children that, they're really at the other extreme. Is would you look at with your experience, would you see things that way, or how do you know? I mean,
Hmm.
we have so many parents coming in and they want their
Sure.
kids on stimulant medication. So how do you make that determination?
I mean, the thing about it is ADHD it's not a difference in kind, it's a difference in degree. Everybody is sometimes forgetful. Everybody sometimes misplaces their keys. But in the same way that everyone sometimes has a down day, and some people are so depressed they don't get out of bed and take care of their kids, right? Those are not like it's on a spectrum, but there comes a point where we say, like, that feels like there's more negative consequences here than I feel good about, right? And that's where we begin to say, okay, I think now we're talking ADHD. It might be a thing that, like, let's say we've got a fifth grader who, like, I sometimes say they're getting by on smarts and charm, right? They're doing fine, like whatever, it's okay. And then they get into middle school, or maybe they get into high school, or maybe they get into college, and now all of a sudden they're really struggling because smarts and charm are no longer sufficient, right? And this is where we begin to say, I think now this is an issue. It's exactly the same way when I ran cross country in college and we are doing 50 miles a week. Lots of high school kids can do 30 miles a week. And then they get to college and their knees can't do 50, right? And as long as they're doing 30, it's fine, right? So as demands go up, we begin to see the people who are going to struggle more. And I think that's where maybe we begin to consider some sort of an intervention, whatever it is. Let me just quickly address two questions in the chat because I just can't not address them. So, parents have a history of substance abuse. They're concerned about their child. Again, the research says untreated ADHD is the risk factor for substance abuse, right? Kids with ADHD are more likely to have substance abuse problems, and medication, if anything, reduces the risk or at least doesn't make it worse. So, like, absolutely, you should be concerned about your kid for the genetic loading of substance abuse problems, but treating their ADHD is the solution, not ignoring it. And then finally, there's a question, do you agree with taking medication Monday through Friday, but not on the weekends? I don't know. Does their ADHD go away on the weekend? Right? I'm gonna guess no. Now depends on the kid, right? If it's a distractible kid, but weekends are fine, like whatever, then okay. Doesn't like don't take meds when you don't need them. Some Sundays I don't put in my contacts because I'm not driving, so it's fine. On the other hand, if it's a really impulsive kid who's stirring the pot with their siblings, or this is a kid who's going to chase a ball across the street without looking, I think I want meds in that kid 7 days a week. I mean, it's not my kid, so I don't get to vote on that, but like I'm going to make my case for it. So, as always, we consider the child, the situation, the demands, the supports, the risks, right? And that's kind of what guides our thoughts on intervention. The good news for our kids with ADHD, but also, any other things, learning differences or other stuff that makes it harder to do what they need to do, is that we're actually doing a much better job than we used to be at identifying, treating, and accommodating students with ADHD. Having said that, the current changes, literally, there's an article yesterday in the New York Times about the Trump administration, trying to eliminate the Department of Education, reassigning the tasks that the Department of Ed does to other departments who have no background knowledge on how to do these things and are having staff cuts as well. All of this, without getting into the politics, the reality of the situation is that there is a very real chance that any kind of meaningful accommodations for any student with anything that qualifies for accommodations will be lost, that students will no longer be receiving accommodations through either because there isn't the funding for it or there's no actual enforcement. So school districts with tight budgets will not be able to provide those services. Like it is not an exaggeration. It is not fear mongering. It is the reality of the situation as it is currently evolving. So I put in red. So CHAD is a national ADHD organization. They have an advocacy center where you can put in your name and address and click, 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 and it'll send stuff to your congressperson and two senators. They're the only hope at this point of rolling back the changes that the Trump administration is trying to do. This is not in your handout. I literally added this morning. So if you go to chad.org and then advocacy, you can find it as well. So as of today, there are still accommodations existing. That is not at all, that is far from guaranteed to continue to exist. But nonetheless, in the current moment, because of accommodations, because of better services that we and others are providing, some of these students with ADHD actually have a real shot of getting into competitive colleges or other training programs that are in line with their abilities and other skills. Now, the bad news is, as I sort of mentioned before, getting by on smarts and charm may not get the job done once you get to college. And I have a little bit of a joke that because I specialize in ADHD, I therefore have a small subspecialty in wayward college students, meaning the young adults who spend anywhere from half a semester to a semester or two away, and then either the school pulls the plug or the parents pull the plug. And the thing is, nobody is happy about that outcome. Not one person is happy about it. The good news usually is what I tell families is, look, this story sucks in the middle right now, but it usually ends well. We just got to get you from here to there. So, what can happen then is just that kind of classic halo effect. Like, oh, they're so great. She's so smart. Or like, he's so engaged in class because he's distracted and he's like talking to try to stay focused. Somehow they made it. They did get into that good school. Surely they'll be fine. Once they get to college, they're going to realize how serious it is and then they're going to do it. Maybe, but I've never done it before, but I will do it later is frankly not a convincing argument. The convincing argument is here I have been doing it, therefore I will continue to do it, much more convincing. So how weak are their weakest links? To what extent are they driving their successes, right? Are parents and teachers the ones ensuring that things happen, or is the student themselves the one who's like getting stuff done? I mentioned this before in one of the questions, but that kids, teens, and adults tend to underreport the extent of their symptoms. And I don't think it's psychological defensiveness. I think it's that genuinely they don't realize how distractible and forgetful and whatever they are. It's sort of like they forget how forgetful they are in a way. And the whole like parents being concerned is sort of like a much ado about nothing, right? Somehow it's going to work out, even though I can't really make a convincing argument why that would be. Obviously, teenagers, it is developmentally appropriate for them to want independence, right? They want to run their own show. Sure, absolutely. And also, there are reasons why we don't let, 15-year-olds have total freedom in their life. But that's even more true when that teenager has ADHD, right? And because they've been perhaps micromanaged more, they're even more desiring that independence. But also, even though maybe the parents have been sort of nervous Nellies, it's not completely anxiety based. Like there is some like hard facts, some real reality there for why the parents say, I don't think you're ready to go off and do this on your own yet, or I'm not going to just let you manage your homework anymore. So when I talk to families of like juniors or seniors who are looking at colleges, but frankly, even like freshmen and sophomores, I will sort of emphasize this fact that when you apply to college or a VOTEC program or a, IT program or whatever, it's not only about convincing the admissions department. I mean, yes, you need to convince them and they need to let you in, but also you need to convince your parents that this is a good idea. This seems like it's going to work out well. And I kind of guide my families then through these conversations of what do the parents need to see from the teenager to feel confident that they're ready for the next step. Um, so, you, the teenager, obviously you want more freedom, both while you are living here at home, but also beyond graduation. Let's talk about what you need to do, right? If you want that freedom, make it easy for your parents to give it to you. Um, and like I'd sort of said before about making the bed, but like let's focus on the things that really matter the most. So getting homework done without being pestered, getting stuff around the house done, managing your stress so you're not like taking it out on the people around you, getting to work on time, just all the basic stuff involved in running a life. Certainly, grades are important and SAT scores and whatever, like they are, that is a reality. So, certainly, you will have more opportunities open to you if you're doing a good job of managing your grades. But also, it is not just about grades. Let's not make grades a death march or this like bitter sort of tug of war between parents and kids, or even for the kid themselves, right? If they're like freaking out and really anxious about their grades. So, more important than your GPA, I think, is being an engaged learner, right? Like you like school, you're actively applying yourself to it, feeling like you're an effective learner so that I've written a 5-page paper and I feel pretty good about being able to do it. Now I have a 10-page paper. Do I feel like I'm ready to kind of make that leap, right? Do I feel like I can pull it off? And having a positive relationship with parents and teachers. So, not getting too caught up in the sort of like college application rat race. I have plenty of adult clients who are living good lives, are very successful at work. They were in no way vying for valedictorian in high school, right? Like, and I have some of them who kind of laugh and brag a little bit about how bad they were in high school, but they're doing great in life. So like, let's not freak out about things that don't necessarily need to be freaked out about. Um, because ultimately, we're preparing our kids for life beyond school, beyond high school, beyond college, beyond whatever it is that they're going to do next. Um, my big thing is focusing on a sustainable process, right? That it serves you not only today with today's demands, but serves you going forward. That as your demands increase, as they do from ninth grade to 10th grade, and definitely from 12th grade to college, or if you're living in an apartment with your friends or whatever, like the demands take a huge leap. And if too much of your success is based on getting lucky or just being really smart and somehow being able to get a good grade without really having good study skills or not really investing the time, or just charm that, like, well, the paper was due today, but like, okay, fine. Yeah, you can turn it in tomorrow. That's all right. The problem with that is next year's teacher or professors may not take it a day late. And then it's a big, big problem. So, in terms of this, what I sort of look for, the things that to me look like better predictors of long-term success, or at least better predictors of being successful in the move from high school to college, is not just the outcome, not just sort of what grade did you get, but also like how did you get it? So, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. But also things like how are you keeping track of what you need to do, meaning homework and stuff, but also other things like your work shifts or when soccer practices or when is the play rehearsal or when are you meeting your friends or whatever. Do you have an effective way of keeping track of stuff? Do you have an effective way of keeping track of the items in your life? Are you losing your keys? Are you losing your cell phone? How many times have you lost a sweatshirt? Things like that. Are they managing their time well, both in terms of deadlines, but also getting places on time, school, work, practice, whatever, family dinner? How are they handling sleep, diet, and exercise, right? I said this before, right? Teens in general, not awesome at this. Teens with ADHD, especially not awesome at this. And it makes everything harder. And just generally managing stress, managing kind of work versus play, right? Are they in general kind of navigating their days and weeks in a reasonable enough kind of a way? Now, the thing about process versus outcome is if I go to the bar tonight and I get completely hammered, I drink way too much, and then I drive home and I don't kill anyone and I don't get arrested, and then my wife yells at me for drunk driving, is it a reasonable position for me to say, look, it worked out fine. Obviously, I'm kind of awesome at drunk driving. I don't really understand why you're upset at me. Clearly, I'm really good at this. I've done it a bunch of times and it's always fine, right? Like, no, no, it isn't. That is insane, right? That is a terrible way of interpreting the data. Absolutely guaranteed some terrible thing is going to happen if I keep doing that. In the same way, there's a difference between I had a really big paper due on Friday. I worked on it a little bit each night through the week. And then Thursday, I went to bed at 10 and I just handed it in on Friday, A minus, versus Thursday, wait, when's that paper due? Oh, crap. Okay. And then I stay up all night or I stay up till 2 in the morning, but I'm really smart and I'm a good writer. And somehow I like get lucky and I make it work, A minus. It's the same grade on paper, but I'm not betting $40,000 of college tuition for first semester on the second kid, right? I'm going to be a lot more nervous if that's how you're getting your good grades that got you into the college that's costing 40 grand. So for one of those semesters, by the way. So having a good process, it's not just that it serves you better now today under the current demands of like, let's say 12th grade, but it also scales up better when the demands increase in college. And it's just like it is a much more reliable predictor of future success. So, how are you handling all the different parts of your life? And how much are your parents the ones kind of pushing you along or being the bumpers that kind of keep you on track? Often then, our teenagers will they'll resist the work that we're doing. And again, sometimes it's sort of like a much ado about nothing, like, I'm fine. I don't understand why you're stressed out about this. Um, or potentially it's more about like, just sort of like, I don't need the help. I'm fine. I don't want to be someone who needs help, right? I think I'm doing okay. So it just makes life a lot harder for them and it makes life a lot more stressful for the people around them. So how do we help our teenagers recognize this, not in a way that makes them feel bad, but in a way that helps them kind of take it seriously and to really sort of address the stuff that they can and begin kind of working on good habits. And I'll sometimes lean into oppositionality a bit by saying, look, I know it sucks to have your parents on your case, but here's the deal. When you drop the ball, you like give them an invitation to intrude on your life on a silver platter. Like the best way to get your parents out of your life, just show them you can do it on your own and then they can't give you a hard time about anything. So I mentioned this earlier in one of the questions, but like running failable experiments, meaning like we don't run experiments with drunk driving because the consequences are too high, unacceptable. But things like we're going to try for a week or two, you manage your own homework. Parents don't say anything. If you're doing it well, as defined, this is what success looks like. No grades below this or not more than one missing assignment or whatever. If you're hitting the mark, you keep being you, right? You keep doing it. And also, if you fall short, here's what we're going to do. And maybe we write this all down so we all remember it the same way. I think kind of the bigger picture on all of this beyond school or whatever, it's about active problem solving, meaning, can you do what you need to do to address the barriers that come up in life, the challenges, the things that get screwed up, maybe for your fault or maybe not for your fault, but things get screwed up sometimes. So, can they recognize that there's actually a problem? In other words, hey, what grade do you have in physics now? How's that going? I know you kind of bombed that first test. Where are you at? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't really looked at my, they're like, or like, oh, wait, when are your finals? I'm not sure. I don't know when, stuff like that. Um, do they feel comfortable asking questions in class if they don't understand something? Do they feel comfortable talking to a teacher or their classmates about it? Can they look information up online, YouTube, Khan Academy, whatever? Maybe saying, hey, I need a tutor. Chemistry's kind of killing me. It doesn't make any sense. Are they willing to put in the extra effort if they need to, like go beyond the basics? This is what we would hope for, and this is the barriers to it. So if someone isn't taking a more active problem solving approach, why not? Like, what exactly is stopping them? Maybe the issue is they think they're doing better than they are until all of a sudden it's too late, right? And if that's the case, then we need to work on how can you check more how you're doing, talk to your teachers, talk to your parents, somehow be more tuned in. Maybe they are aware there's a problem, but they can't get themselves going early enough. So, how do we activate them a little bit earlier? Maybe it's more about being either kind of unwilling to do the work. I know I'm doing bad in English, but I hate it and I can't make myself work on it. Or maybe they don't tolerate the discomfort well, right? It's too uncomfortable to be bad at something, or it's just too painful and boring and frustrating, confusing and annoying to do the work. Maybe they have other priorities, like hanging with my friends or my girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever friend. Like that's maybe the thing. And this is not ADHD. Maybe they're just sort of entitled or naive, right? And that involves some different interventions. Maybe there's some social anxiety about talking to the teacher, and that's the point of intervention. Or maybe they're kind of black and white and they're thinking about getting extra help. Stupid kids get a tutor. Well, no, smart kids who want to do better get tutors. Or kind of pessimistic, self-fulfilling prophecies. It's never going to work out. What's the point anyway? Well, when you half-ass your effort, probably surprising to no one, it probably doesn't work out that well. But we haven't really tried investing yourself. Maybe now that we're dealing with your ADHD, maybe now that you got some meds, I don't know, maybe there could be a different outcome this time. Everything sort of feeds in to this decision, to this sort of assessment by the parents and by you and by the teen about like, where are you at? How are you doing? How's it looking for the future? Right? What's going well? What's not going well? What do the parents need to see to feel like you are where you need to be? So here we are at the end of junior year. Are you where we would hope you to be on that trajectory to like, here's the day we drop you off with a bunch of your stuff on some college campus somewhere? I think it's important also, this is like an obvious thing, but like we don't do it enough, which is really praising the positives, right? Praising the effort. Like I can tell you're really working harder, or I can see that, you're getting out the door a little bit earlier, right? And not just sort of nitpicking the negatives. I think it's important in these conversations for parents to just sort of say stuff a little bit matter of factly and not get into this nagging and the chase and the power struggle. Just sort of like, you really seem like this week you've really had, like, you've been getting out the door kind of late every morning. It's making me worry about, like, here we are in the middle of senior year. I don't know. I'm starting to feel nervous again about what college might look like for you, right? No fight, no nagging, no criticism or judgment, just a statement of this is how I see it and this is how I'm feeling. I think it's also, this is not completely true, but I will tell families that I think that how you handle the college application is kind of diagnostic or at least like predictive. of how you're actually going to do being in college. And the reason is the whole college application process involves a whole lot of steps. There's a lot of delays. There's a lot of following up. There's a lot of working on stuff early that doesn't come to fruition until much later. It looks a lot more like college than high school does. So, how are they handling that whole process of completing applications, sitting down to pick schools that they're going to apply to in the first place, chasing down recommendations from their teachers? Like, how are they handling the whole process? And if they're very sort of passive and casual about it, if they're kind of avoidant about it, if parents have to be hounding them and they're not doing the work, like it does not bode well for what they're going to do when they're sitting in a dorm with no adult oversight. The line I sometimes use is, if today was the day to send a college or whatever post high school program a deposit check, do you think I would do it? Given how you're handling things, given how things are working out, are you making it easy for me to feel confident that you've got this? Like, you're good, we're going to be fine. And if the answer is yes, awesome. If the answer is, well, actually, no, then I think we need to have a conversation sooner than later so we can get you back on track, because we all have the same goal for you to go forth into the world and live a good life. So, in terms of all of this, I say this slightly tongue in cheek, but there's a lot of truth in it, which is, as much as parents often want the kid, the young adult, the 18-year-old to like go to college and like be successful. And absolutely the 18-year-old wants to get the hell out of the family home and go live the good life on a college campus. The reality of the situation is this: if you are not ready to go to college and be successful, you are actually better off staying at home, playing video games all day, and doing bong hits or vaping all night. Like, literally, that is the better alternative to going and failing out of college. And the reason is this: when you fail out of one school, they don't want you back, and no other schools are lining up to take you in. If you waste a semester doing kind of nothing, you're actually you're at zero, but you're not down in the negative, right? So it's a bit of a shocking thing to say. And again, there's a bit of tongue in cheek about it, but it is very much the truth. And I say this to counter some of the sort of over optimism of some parents or teens, or the anxiety of what if they don't go. So, having set that up, let's talk about gap years. We don't do them a lot here in the States, but in the UK, they do them more. Australia, Europe, like other places in the world are much cooler about gap years. I wish more of my clients took gap years, especially all those wayward college students. I wish they had taken a gap year. Now, the fear that a lot of parents have is if they take time off, they'll never go to college. And I do understand that as a fear. But my response is this: if that's true, they didn't really want to go anyway, and it wasn't going to work out. The goal is not to go to college. The goal is to go to college, be successful, have a great experience, learn about yourself, learn about the world, come out with skills and a degree that you can have a good life with. Going to college for one semester and failing out does not accomplish that goal. So in that case, a gap year is a way better plan B than the failing out is. For some students, again, brilliant as they might be, the step from like, here I am living at home with tons of oversight, to here I am on a college campus with no oversight, that's too big a step to do in one jump. And instead, a gap year where they do some sort of a middle step might be the thing that they need. Now, one of the benefits of that is, I talked right on slide 3 that there's a 2 to 4 year delay in brain development and the development of executive functions. Another year of just frankly life leads to more brain development. They are more mature and ready to handle the demands of college. Also, it gives them a chance to practice something that's not high school, but is also not yet college, but something in between, right? More life experience. And frankly, I would much rather that you go do a terrible job at Target and get fired and learn some good stuff there rather than learning those lessons $40,000 later at some college campus, right? Because you can always get another job after Target. Like, fine. It's a cheaper, less painful, less emotionally embarrassing lesson to get fired from Target. So, in terms of all of this, often, again, because, the teenagers are more optimistic about their abilities, the parents are often the ones worrying more, right? The teen is like, I'll be fine. I just want to get out of here. The parents are one like chewing their fingernails down to the knuckle. And the challenge here is the parents feel this burden of responsibility. I must ensure that my teen is ready for college. Obviously we love our kids and we want them to be ready, but also we have less and less power to ensure that they are, right? It's kind of like pushing a rope. It doesn't really work that well beyond a certain point. Instead, parents need to shift along the way of parenting to giving more and more of that responsibility to the teen and kind of using consequences to kind of pull the right behaviors. Or another way of putting it is it becomes the teen's job to prove that they're ready, not the parent's job to ensure that they're ready. And if it feels like this inevitability, my kid's going to go away to college no matter what, then you feel like you got to make them ready, right? You got to do what you can do to make sure they're ready. But if we have the second option, if they're not ready for college, it's all right. They'll do this other thing instead. It takes all that pressure off, right? And now the parent can sort of deal with stuff maybe in a sort of wiser, calmer way. So, in terms of deciding to do a gap year, you can always apply to college at the end in the fall of senior year like everybody else does. And then once you get accepted and you then say, okay, here are the schools I got into, I choose this one, you can then contact that school. Most schools are very happy to defer an acceptance, right? You got accepted for this September, but instead you're going to come next September. You probably pay a deposit, but whatever. Because they know a kid who takes a gap year is probably going to come as a better student than the kid who comes right away. So, what is the school's deadline for when you need to decide, actually, I'm not going to be coming? And really, the deadline involves things like when do you have a non-refundable deposit on housing or class registration or whatever? That's your real deadline, frankly. Um, but it's also a thing that for these students who, let's just say their GPA doesn't quite match their intelligence or abilities, doing something good for a gap year actually gives you a stronger application and you can get into a better college or program after a gap year, which also for people who feel kind of socially embarrassed about taking a gap year, that can become a way to like talk to your neighbors and your aunt and uncle about like, well, I'm going to do this and then I'll apply to a better school or something. Like, I think you can just say, this is what I'm doing. You don't get to have an opinion. Or, well, opinions are free, but I'm going to feel good about this regardless of how you feel. But I'm doing the thing that's best for me. But for some people who are more embarrassed about it, this might make it easier for them in how they talk to other people about it. Um, in terms of what to do during a gap year, there are amazing gap year programs. And if any of you guys are willing to pay 70 grand for me to go on one of these gap year programs, I'll gladly take you up on it. But you don't have to pay $1 million for an amazing gap year experience. Some sort of combination of working somewhere locally, maybe doing some volunteering, maybe taking some classes at home, like, whatever, fill your day with good stuff. I have a saying, there's nothing like a crappy job to convince someone of the value of an education. Working at Target, it's interesting at first. It's nice to get a paycheck every week. But after a while, you're kind of like, ugh, this can't be my life, right? All of a sudden now, prereqs and mandatory classes and whatever seems a lot more interesting, perhaps. I'm a big proponent of community colleges. They're often the cheapest credits you can get. They give you a chance to crank up your GPA. They give you a chance to knock out just your basic kind of gen ed prereqs. So, like, take some stats, take an English class, whatever. And living at home is a much cheaper option than living somewhere else. So, like, you put together a program that feels pretty good. The goal of the gap year is again creating that middle step from tons of structure and oversight of high school to Wild West of college campus, right? Like you're going from here to here. So there needs to be some greater independence, right? You have more freedom, and also with freedom comes responsibility. So you're going to make a meal or two, a dinner or two a week. You're going to go to the grocery store. You have more chores around the house because now that we are your roommates, we're going to prepare you to not be murdered in your sleep by your roommates that you're going to have next year because you're an annoying roommate to them, right? So, what is this stuff that's going to train you to be a good roommate with people who don't, love you, with all their heart kind of a thing? In terms of some of the sort of rules and expectations, then, um, obviously, an 18-year-old who's living at home will absolutely hear from their 18-year-old friends living in a dorm with, again, ultimate freedom to do everything they want. And they're going to try to convince you, as the parent, that they should be able to do this at home. But that's not how the world works, right? And some of it is just family rules, like, no, you're not doing drugs in our house. Or like, no, you and your underage friends are not drinking here at our house where we face legal liability. No way. But some of it is just like basic consideration of like, if we were not genetically related to you, then what does it take to be a good roommate? So we are all asleep. You can't be banging around making food in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. So you need to be a considerate roommate here. That's kind of what we're working on. And then some of it is just about like building skills and habits, right? We're going to give you things to do because this is a good place to practice it. So you're ready to like go have a great experience when you don't live with us. In terms of the gap year, it's really about the long game. And I know a lot of families feel this time pressure of like, we got to get them to college, or I got to get to college, or I'm going to be out of step, or my friends are all going to graduate before me, and all of that perhaps is true. And I understand why that feels bad. But also going away to college and failing out, or going back to college and failing out, doesn't get you to graduation quicker. It might actually get you to graduation slower because the school may force you to take time off, right? So, but also once you've graduated, it really makes so little difference if you graduate at 22 versus 23 versus 24. It feels like a big deal at 18 or 19 or 20, but it really doesn't matter. Once you have your degree, nobody's going to ask you how many semesters it took to get there. If the student has not shown by their actions that they're ready, then we just need to hold off another semester and then we're going to see. It is not punitive. It's not about punishment. It's about, I don't think you're ready. It's like when they were younger and we say, no, you cannot cross the street by yourself. An adult needs to be there. We're not punishing our kid. We just want to make sure that they're going to be okay. It is exactly the same thing. And preferably, we've had those conversations before. This is what we need to see. Show us this. We will gladly set you loose on the world. I think it's important also to consider the fact that not everybody has to go to college. Now, there's a lot of jobs out there that don't require a college degree. So, all the building trades, some of the like, IT stuff, you can make really good money without a college degree as long as you have the skills and maybe the certifications. I used to practice outside of in Northern Virginia, outside of DC. I had a client who was a hairdresser in Bethesda, which is like kind of one of the upscale DC suburbs. She's never made it through college. She said, I bill more per hour than a lot of attorneys do. Clearly, she's very good at what she does, and I'm sure she's worked very hard on her craft, but like, you don't have to have a college degree. And especially for some of these career options, you make good money, you have smaller student loans, you also start making money a lot sooner. So if you look at lifetime earnings, it's actually not that far off of what someone might make with a college degree. So like we really need to think in a more nuanced kind of a way about this. Now, the key, though, is if you want more than minimum wage, you have to have skills that other people don't. If you can only do the stuff everybody else can do, then you're working the register at Target, or you're stocking shelves, you're working as a waitress or whatever. So you need to have some sort of skills that somebody wants to pay more than minimum for. You still need to manage your life. And you might have to work a bit harder to get in the door, perhaps. I've got some clients without college degrees, but great skills, and they really need to kind of like they're not the obvious candidate who's going to apply through Indeed, and the computer algorithm is going to select them to be the person to get hired. I think it's important also to ask who's actually worried about the lack of a college degree. Is it the student or is it the parents? And is this really like, let's really take some time to talk about and think about what is the best path for this person in life? If a student has gone away to college and now they're back home, and now we're trying to figure out, are they ready to go back? It's really kind of the same thing as if they're a end of senior year 18-year-old. So how do they handle that process? Are they showing with their actions that they're ready for that level of independent functioning? And how, just like, we talked about the college application, there's a bit of an application, or at least there's some paperwork involved in going back to school. So how are they handling that? Are they tracking all the deadlines, right? When do you need to apply for housing? If you need to write a letter to kind of apply to be reaccepted, or to, you know, for your medical withdrawal to be sort of like, okay, now you're allowed to come back, whatever. Register, all this stuff, right? Do they know when the deadlines are? Are they getting stuff done before the deadline? Do you or the parents need to harass them to get stuff done, or to even ask them, hey, when's that due? And by the way, everything is due much earlier than you think it's going to be due. So, are they doing the things that they need to do to get themselves back? So let's talk about, what do we do then once this student has left the home? Now, depending upon where the student is, where the family is, where you are, whether you're doing video sessions, whatever, you may be seeing one or more of these folks, or you may be allowed to see them, or possibly you're no longer allowed to see them, if they're going out of state or whatever. But nonetheless, let's talk about how do we handle these families once the student has left? I think we all know this. College campuses, super fun, lots of amazing, really exciting things going on. Also, what's going on is boring homework, 8 a.m. classes, weird requirements that for some reason you have to do and also keep track of. So it really, like, college campuses are really kind of a study in extremes in that way. And students with ADHD, the ADHD hits on a lot of those things that are most important to keep track of and yet hardest to keep track of, right? That there's a lot about that level of independent functioning, those executive functions, that makes college much harder for these students. Again, even if they're brilliant, like amazing at math, amazing at English essays, but really struggling on the details. I think the biggest mistake I see my college kids make is they assume that college is the same as high school, right? So in high school, I could study 2 or 3 chapters the night before and get a pretty good grade on the test, so I'm going to do that now. Except in college, it's not 2 or 3 chapters. And the test wasn't 3 weeks ago. The test was 6 weeks ago, and it's 9 chapters now. You probably can't do 9 chapters the night before. Or you could write a 5 page paper, but not a 15 page paper, or whatever. Or the teacher, the professor is not giving you 17 reminders about, the labs that you need to complete or the math stuff on the math portal or whatever. So, um, in addition, there are all the extra demands of independent living. Now, granted, if you're in a dorm and you're going to the dining hall, there's a lot less to keep track of. But if you're living in an apartment, especially, like with a bunch of your super fun friends, then I don't know who's paying the electric bill. How are you managing your budget? Especially if your parents say, here is your entire semester's worth of money. Don't spend it all in the first of the 16 weeks. Um, are you getting to the grocery store or are you eating out? Um, do you have time to cook? Do you know how to cook? Are you cleaning so that friends come over and then run away screaming? Are you getting enough sleep? Again, your friends are awesome, but also homework is boring and still needs to be done. Are you getting homework done? Are you getting to class, et cetera, et cetera? I've got a line that whoever you're standing next to has a really big impact on what happens next. So, where you live, who you're living with has a really big impact. And if you are someone who waits to the last minute, if you don't sort of invest the effort of like, oh, I need to find a roommate, I need to ask around, or as a freshman, I need to spend some time on, the Facebook page or the Instagram thing or whatever to find a good roommate, and you just get stuck with some random person who may not be a good fit, right? That can make a hard situation even harder. And just in general, is the teen realistic, right? Are they talking about how awesome it's going to be to sleep in late and go to the football games? Or are they also talking about what it's going to take to get to class and to do the things they need to do? It's often helpful to have some conversations about like, what is the parent's role in all this? Okay, granted, 18, 19, 20-year-old, you're off living on your own. That is true. But I don't know. What are your folks doing here? How much are they involved? How much are they not? For a lot of parents, there's kind of a surprise that the easy access they had to teachers and grade portals does not come with them to college. That just like there's HIPAA laws, there's also laws about educational information. Professors and colleges are legally unable to release information to a parent unless the adult student signs a release of information. So, how involved is the parent going to be? And I think some specific conversations to have is how often are we checking in with each other, right? And some of it is simply, I love you. I'm interested in your life. I would like to know what's going on. Please share what's happening. Some of it is also business stuff of like, are you getting to class? What are your grades? Also, are you still alive? Because I haven't heard from you in 6 days. Um, so some of it is that, how often are we going to talk and what are we going to talk about? Some of it is, do the parents have access to the class or grade portals? Do they have access to the kids' school email, or their bank account or their meal account? Some of you guys might be thinking, yeah, obviously, and others might be thinking, what? Why would they? And the truth is, I don't know, it kind of depends, right? Again, if you can handle it on your own, if you have shown me by your actions that you can handle this well, I'm going to tell your parents to back off and leave you alone. And if you have shown by your actions that you are not handling it well, right? As in, You're not checking your email. You're not seeing your professor messaged you. You're not seeing the general information from the school, even though, let's be honest, they send a million emails that are worthless, but a couple of them are like really important, right? If you're not managing and staying on top of it, it makes it really hard for your parents to stay out of it. And frankly, it makes it hard for me to defend your idea that your parents should stay out of it. So let's have some real conversation and some real sort of agreement on what's happening with this. I think also, what causes some sort of an escalation in the parent's involvement or in the parent's contact, as in, if I don't hear from you in 4 days, I will be calling your RA. Sorry, right? Like, just text me that you're still alive. Just let me know that you're okay. In the balancing act that we're sort of navigating in these families is helping the parents, frankly, be able to sleep at night and not have to worry about what's happening with their kid, 4 states away. But also the teen or young adult sense of autonomy of like, I'm living my life, I'm doing the work, I'm figuring this out, I'm making progress here. Earlier, when we were talking about high school seniors, we talked about like, what does it take to feel like, yeah, go forth to college. I wish you good luck. Maybe we need to also have some conversation about like, congratulations on your first semester of college or your first semester back at college. Let's talk about what it takes to get a second semester. What the parents need to see to, again, make that big deposit on next year's housing, on, registering for classes, whatever. And again, it's much more about process than outcome. A good outcome with a terrible process does not give me faith for a second semester. I want a good process with just a good enough outcome. That gives me much more confidence and calm about how next semester is going to work out. We might need to have some conversation about like, when does this conversation happen, which might involve what are the deadlines on things like housing and class withdrawals. What constitutes evidence? I'm doing fine versus I'd like to see a screenshot of your grade portal. Some kids are, I don't know. Let's just say some kids are more believable than others when they say they're doing fine. Also, who starts the conversation? Do the parents start it or does the student start it, right? Because that might be something that would be helpful to think about. There's a quote, I think this is from Woody Allen, that 90% of success in life comes from just showing up. Okay, maybe 90 is a bit high, but some percent of success comes from showing up. And if you're a college student, 90% of success in college comes from showing up to get enough sleep. Easier said than done. Related to how much sleep you get, showing up for every class, not some of them. Also, if you miss one class, turns out it's much easier to miss a second class, which makes it even easier to miss a third class. So maybe we don't start that downward spiral in the first place. Showing up to study and not just counting on, I'll figure it out or I'll just do it at the end or whatever. Maybe there's some scheduled times of like after math, I go to lunch and then I'll go to the library for a couple hours and then I'll go do whatever, right? Maybe scheduled times is helpful if the now and then isn't working out. And then finally, showing up to take your medication. If you've been prescribed medication, if this seems like a generally good idea, just take your meds, like take your meds. Often one of the first dominoes I see is in my students who boomerang back home, they stop taking their meds. That's often one of the early signs that things are going to go to hell here. So if you need your medication, be honest about the fact that you need it. And as the therapist, we may need to have some hard conversations about, do you need medication? How's it when you don't take it? Like, seriously, how much do you get out of class? By the way, are you even getting to class, right? And to really sort of in a, in their best interest kind way, but really kind of challenge them on this. Like, dude, I'm really worried like you're going to fail yourself out and you're going to be really pissed that you can't go back next semester. So I would rather have this conversation now in week 4 and not have you crying in my office in week 14. Um, in terms of this, I don't expect perfection on these 4 things of showing up. I'm just looking for more days that you got enough sleep, more classes that you went to. Every time you do go to class is a little bit better than a time that you don't. So definitely not black and white, definitely progress over perfection, definitely just what is the next good thing that you can do. I sort of touched on this before, but the whole hesitation about medication, college students are really notorious for taking themselves off of meds. Definitely ADHD meds, but probably other meds too. Um, so again, maybe we need to have that conversation, but there's also some logistical conversations of, let's say they know they need the meds, they're willing to take it. How do they get their refills? Right? Is there a pharmacy nearby that has medication that they can, and can they get to it? Do they have a car? How hard is it to get to the pharmacy? Where is their prescriber? If their prescriber is out of state from where they're going to school, probably their stimulant prescriptions can't cross state lines. So, how does that get handled? And by the way, let's not wait till you have 4 pills left before we start thinking about, like, so what are we doing here? So ideally the parents or prescriber are having this conversation, but as the therapist, we may be the one who starts that conversation. In terms of support services, as much as accommodations and supports in the K to 12 environment are federally mandated, although who knows what that will turn out to. As of today, they are. What it turns out to be, like I said, might be all lost. But in the post high school environment, there are no federal mandates. So every college does things a little differently. And in terms of this, there are sort of the general services that any student can access, right? So these are things like I need a chem tutor, or they have study skills classes, or there's like a writing center or a math center where you can drop in and get help, right? So like that's available to anybody. And we would certainly encourage any student who needs them to access them. But then there are the more specific services that need to actually be qualified for. So these offices have many names. Sometimes they're called like the Disability Services Office. Sometimes they're called like the Student Success Center. So you need to figure out what the name of the place is at that school. But it's, I think it, as much as it might say stuff on the website, I often encourage parents or the student to just call the place. Call them up, see if you can have a brief conversation. What's the deal? What's actually available? By which I mean, no, seriously, okay, you say you have these tutors, but are they available, or do they all get booked up in like 20 seconds? What does it take to qualify? So do you need a full testing battery? Can a letter from a qualified mental health professional, is that sufficient? Right? Really, really what needs to be done? What are the deadlines, et cetera? If I could pick one accommodation for a student with ADHD, generically speaking, the accommodation is this: a weekly check-in with someone who can just go through their schedule. Like, okay, so last time you said you had that big English paper due. What happened? Did you get it done? Or let's talk about this week. I know you got a chem test coming up, or I know there was that issue where you missed a class and you needed to talk to the professor. Did you actually do that? Do we need to send them an email? Let's maybe role play. What are you going to say if you stop in during? Let's look up their office hours. Ideally, it's somebody on campus, partially because it's probably free, but they also know the lay of the land and they have connections in a way that as an external professional, we don't. But if it's not someone on campus, if the family can afford it, to pay someone external is far better, and almost certainly cheaper than another semester's worth of tuition. Um, Potentially also helpful is things like getting copies of some other students' notes, maybe getting the professor's slides ahead of time, maybe getting extended time for a test. Although this is not always helpful, but if the student runs out of time or impulsively rushes through for fear of running out of time, then it could be helpful. Maybe taking the test in a quiet testing center and not in the noisy room with 600 of their closest friends or whatever. So, like, sometimes there are other accommodations that can be helpful, but it's a matter of really figuring out what's actually going to be helpful for you. And by the way, are you actually going to use them? Because K to 12, they force accommodations upon you, sort of, often not. But absolutely, your college professor is not chasing you down to get a copy of the test to take it to the quiet testing center. They are definitely not doing that. So the student needs to be the one to initiate this stuff and be sort of actively engaged in making sure it happens, including sometimes having a conversation with a reluctant professor or taking it back to the support office when the professor isn't really doing what they're supposed to do. One of the things I've noticed with some of my students is that although there are some students with ADHD who get involved with like 17 clubs and activities and then don't actually make it to class, um, I've also noticed that there's students at the other end of the spectrum where maybe they're going to class, but they're not really doing anything else, right? They're hanging out in their room, they're playing video games, they're screwing around on their phone, but they're not getting involved, they're not meeting friends, they're not involved in activities, they don't have other good reasons to want to come back for another semester. Now, I'm old enough that when I went to college, no offense to my roommate, who is a decent guy, pretty damn boring in my room, right? Sitting in my room, there was nothing to do. So I was motivated to get my work done and then wander the halls or go meet up with my friends and do fun things. But in the age of screens, you can entertain yourself by yourself in your room. I've got a college kid I've been seeing. There are days where he would watch 6 hours of YouTube. Other than sleeping and working, I don't do anything for six. I never do anything for 6 hours in a day, right? So like he's hiding in his phone and not engaged. Some of that's ADHD, a lot of that's anxiety, but so the concern here is if you're not actively engaged in campus, if you don't have good reasons to show up, that you want to show up for another semester, you don't have good motivators to do the work that sometimes you don't want to do. Because you can watch 6 hours of YouTube at home, by the way. You don't have to be on campus. So sometimes we need to kind of push our college students to like get out there and make some friends. What's holding you back? Are you socially anxious? Do you not know what to do? Let's find some activities. Let's get you going. Maybe you need better roommates, right? So let's think about next year's roommates, or maybe you need to change rooms this year. What activities would be fun or meaningful? Do you need a job? Do you need to volunteer, right? Like, let's get you out into the world and enjoying this amazing experience that you're here for, because it's not just about the classes. So ultimately, it comes down to this. Kids with ADHD tend to become adults with ADHD, right? Mostly ADHD tends to be lifelong. There's some catching up of that developmental delay of the executive functions by the time you hit your mid 20s. But, generally speaking, ADHD tends to stick around. So it's less about the crisis and it's more about the long game. How do we build the skills? How do we build the self-esteem? How do we build the, problem solving, the distress tolerance skills? How do we build the positive supportive relationships to get these kids through elementary school, middle school, high school, and then whatever life holds beyond, so that they can build a good life for themselves as an adult and be the person in the world that we would hope them to be. So ultimately, then, some of it is about putting out fires. More importantly, is preserving good opportunities, that you will have the opportunities that you would like to have, the opportunities that will be meaningful to you, and facilitating a sense of agency, right? That you have the power to create the life that you want, that you have the ability to deal with frustrations and setbacks and problems that life also brings. So, like, this is the bigger picture of what we're doing here with these kids, teens, and young adults. So my website is drarituckman.com. I've got a bunch of information there on all sorts of ADHD stuff. I also have information on my new book, my fifth book, the ADHD Productivity Manual, which is just all full of strategies to help folks with ADHD just sort of handle all the different demands in life with a bit more grace and hopefully a bit more time to enjoy the fruits of their labors or something. So you can check that out as well. I see there's a question in the chat. How do you get the parent to be consistent, especially if they themselves have ADHD or the other parent has ADHD or there's multiple children with ADHD? So that is an excellent question. And first of all, there's some decent odds that one of those other parents has ADHD if you've got a kid with ADHD. And I think there's a balance to be struck here. It might be that each parent offers something a little bit different as a parent, but that's fine, right? Kids need a lot of different inputs. Um, and I think as a parent with ADHD, on the one hand, you can very much empathize and say, like, look, I get it. I understand. Trust me, I had the same struggles, and maybe still today I still do. Um, but also, I think to sort of to some degree to kind of lead by example, to really focus on what matters most, to not get hung up on the details, and to just sometimes admit it when you blew it of like, you know what? I totally should have set that up better. I'm sorry I didn't. What do we do now? We're working on this together. What do we do next? So I think having a bit of humility and empathy.
I did get a question that was just sent to me directly
Hmm.
earlier. It says, I've worked with some families where their child is doing well academically, but struggling socially and with distress tolerance. In
Yeah,
these cases, would it be beneficial to advocate to hold a child back a year?
right. I've seen, I'm definitely not an expert in holding kids back, but somebody told me about some research that holding a kid back in terms of the stress of it is equivalent to the death of a parent. That seems rather excessive, but I mean, so I understand the idea of holding kids back. I think that you need to really, really kind of think about it. Um, I do think that, the thing that makes parents cry is not kids getting bad grades on tests, right? Like parents get anxious about it. The thing that makes parents cry is when their kids don't get invited, right? Like that is the heartbreak. So, um, there is stuff out there on social stuff for kids, and there's a couple awesome people. I'll type them into the chat. There's a couple great people. Ryan, that's his name. So Caroline McGuire and Ryan Wexelblatt have awesome stuff on kind of the social part of ADHD for kids. I think Ryan does mostly kind of like he does more kind of boys, sort of preteen boys and like early adolescent boys under the name ADHD Dude. Caroline has awesome stuff for parents to help kids. She also has stuff for adults, but the social stuff is really, really important. I mean, it is because like nobody wants to sit next to the impulsive, restless kid who's getting in trouble, right? Nobody wants the kid in their study group who doesn't do the work. Like I get it, but also it's like this is some of the consequence of ADHD. And this is why I think it's important and we need to take it seriously. And maybe we need to consider medication and doing all the other things. And also, whether it's kids or adults, kind of helping them understand these things are hard for you. They will be a challenge. You have many other great qualities. Everybody struggles somewhere. And finding the people who think you're awesome and, like, I don't know, appreciate your good qualities and don't get as annoyed by the other stuff, right? So, sometimes it's a thing of it's not that I interrupt or I'm forgetful and I'm a bad friend to you. It's that we are not good friends for each other. We are not a good fit. What you want in a friend is not what I can deliver. And frankly, what I want in a friend is not what you can deliver, right? So it's not only about the kid or adult with ADHD being at fault. It's just like we are not a good match, which I think is an important reframe in that. And sometimes kind of working with that kid or adult to like not tolerate bad behavior. Like don't let your friends treat you badly just because you show up late. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of conversation on this social piece.
And there was one other question put in the chat. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations on alternative treatments such as neurofeedback?
Yeah. So unfortunately, any of these kind of alternative treatments like neurofeedback, dietary interventions, nutritional supplements, brain training programs of any kind, things that chiropractors do. Like the reality is, none of those interventions have anything close to proven effectiveness for ADHD. Like they just don't work. So as much as there's parents and adults who would like alternatives, either because they don't like the idea of medication or they have tried the medications, like the question earlier, and none of them work, none of these things are helpful. Like they just don't work for ADHD. What is generally helpful to all humans are things like eating generally healthy food, generally getting enough sleep, getting exercise, and mindfulness. Everybody benefits from that, but that's not an ADHD treatment. Also, if you're barely keeping your head above water, guess what the first things to go are? Sleep, diet, exercise, mindfulness, right? So sometimes carving out a little bit of time, helping them be more efficient, prioritizing sleep, diet, exercise, mindfulness, might help them be more of their best self, even if it isn't technically treating their ADHD.